Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little review of a classic disc that many of you probably don't know if you're opera fans. It's an opera, an American opera by Dominic Argento, Postcard from Morocco. Really a legendary work in many, many ways and for many reasons. Dominic Argento passed away in 2019. He was 91 years old. And he lived for most of his creative life in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, where he created an artistic community around himself. He was a composition teacher at the University of Minnesota. That was very similar to what Benjamin Britten did in the UK with Attleborough, or whatever you call that place, or the English Opera Group, that sort of thing. He was a vocal music composer first and foremost, although he wrote some fabulous orchestral works as well. He wrote some 14 operas, I think, something like that. And Postcard from Morocco, when it appeared in 1971, was a big deal, a very big deal. It's a splendidly interesting piece. It's about 92 minutes long in this premiere performance, and it's a chamber opera, rather like Britten's chamber operas. You know, the ones that he wrote after Peter Grimes. It's scored, let me see, we have an ensemble here. I can tell you what it is. It's piano, a lot of interesting percussion played by one player, a trap set and other stuff, clarinet, saxophone, trombone, violin, viola, bass, and guitar. A very eclectic and interesting group of instruments. Now, the story of Postcard from Morocco is kind of absurdist expressionist. It's a bunch of people gathered together in a railway station. Think of Rossini's Il Viaggio a Rams. Nothing much happens except that quite a bit happens internally. None of the characters have names except for Mr. Owen. They are known only by the shape of the packages that they carry. There's like a lady with a hat box. She sings about hats. She's the hat lady. So we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters who take on various roles. There's a puppet show going on in the train station, run by a rather sinister and creepy puppeteer. The puppets, of course, come to life, and things happen with them, too. There's a remarkable interlude called Souvenir de Bayreuth, which is a fandango or farrago, I think, as Argento called it, of Wagner tunes, mostly from the Flying Dutchman, to entertain the people sitting at the train station waiting for the train, which of course never arrives, by the way. And it's delightful. The original Souvenir de Bayreuth, by the way, is a piano four-hand or two-piano duet by Foreman and Messager, which is also quite delightful if you get a chance to listen to that, which is based, of course, on parodies of Wagner tunes. Anyway, what happens over these 92 minutes is that the characters are all trying to get inside each other's luggage to see what's going on. There's like a hat person and a shoe person and a lady with a mirror, and it's very, very peculiar. And you don't know anything about these people, and they're all trying to find out what's going on. And ultimately, with Mr. Owen, as they get inside his suitcase and they discover it to be empty. It's empty, which says something about human character and the meaning of life and existence and all of that stuff. And we don't quite know what happens at the end. Mr. Owen dreams of a boat, and he sails off with the puppets, and he's possibly insane. And it's a very, very dreamy, strange piece. Argento's style was completely eclectic. It's largely tonal. It often has popular music influences. The vocal writing can be extremely lyrical. It can also be extremely atonal from time to time, if the situation warrants. But, American opera has always been an iffy thing, right? I mean, the great American opera is Porgy and Bess, we all know, which is itself a very eclectic work. And there have been other wonderful composers of opera in English. We just talked about Minotti's The Medium, for example. But these works are so little exposed and treated generally with derision by the critics, mostly because the best American operas were not going to conform to the academic serialist standard of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and this was composed in 1971. And I remember when it happened, when it was composed, and I remember the discussion that the opera created when I was in high school. Words seeped out. And largely it was because Minnesota is a cultural mecca in the central part of the United States, separated from the East Coast and the West Coast, which have their own, sort of artistic mafia organizations. And Argento was able to work in an artistic community which was entirely congenial to what he was doing. And the performing arts organizations there, the Minnesota Orchestra, the Opera Company, and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, and all these wonderful groups existed to support his work, which allowed him to receive performances which spread out to the rest of the country. It's really a very, very interesting story in the cultural history of the United States, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this splendid opera. It was originally released on a label called Desto, which was a small independent label that had pretty crappy pressings, and then it came out on CRI, which is where this thing is, Composers Recordings. There's another recording of this opera, a very good one, by the way, on the Albany label that was done by the Curtis Opera Company in Philadelphia. So you can get one or the other, and it doesn't really matter which one. The cast here is, let's see, Sarita Roche, who is the hand mirror lady and an operetta singer, and then Barbara Brandt, who is a lady with a cake box, and Janice Hardy, who's a lady with a hat box, and she's also a foreign singer, Yale Marshall, who's a man with old luggage, and the first puppet and an operetta singer. Notice how many of these characters are singers. It's music about music, singing about singing. And then there's Vera Sutton. Vera Sutton is a man with a paint box. It's Mr. Owen. Oh, Vern Sutton. Not Vera Vern, obviously. It's Mr. Owen. And Barry, let's see, how's this one? Barry Busse, a man with a shoe sample kit, and the second puppet. And finally, Michael Foreman, a man with a coronet case, and the puppet maker, the puppeteer. Really a remarkable work. The cast, by the way, the orchestra is led by, it's the Minnesota Opera, under Philip Brunelle. Now, Philip Brunelle was, the Plymouth Music Series guy in Minnesota, who was a colleague of Argento, and they collaborated on many things, and Brunelle's recordings have appeared on all kinds of major labels. He's a major force in American choral music, particularly. So, Postcard from Morocco by Argento is something that, if you like Benjamin Britten's chamber operas, if you like The Turn of the Screw or The Church Parables or one of those things, you're going to want to hear this. It doesn't sound anything like Britten. It's completely original in style, and Argento's a force, a real force. His work hasn't been recorded as much as it deserves to be. There are a couple recordings on reference recordings, by the way, which are really worth hearing. Here they are. I just pulled them out for you. One of them has Casa Guidi, his beautiful song cycle based on letters of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, written for Frederica von Stade. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize or something like that. And his orchestral music, which is really one of, in praise of music, 7 songs for orchestra based on international music of different countries. It's really wonderful. And this has his Valentino dances, the suite from his opera The Dream of Valentino, and Le Tombeau d'Edgar Allan Poe, which is based on his opera The Voyage of Edgar Allan Poe, and his Valse Triste, and a wonderful orchestral work called A Ring of Time, a 4 seasons piece for orchestra. These are all with the Minnesota Orchestra under A.G. Uwe, and they were recorded for reference recordings. So the focus of this talk, of course, is Postcard from Morocco, an opera, as it must be when we talk about Argento's work. But these other things are certainly worth gathering together and hearing. So pay attention to Dominic Argento. And if you're an opera fan, you know where to start. If you're an other thing fan, you know where to start. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.